In this series of videos we're going to look at databases. So far we've looked at APIs in as much as programming with PHP, having a look at it through Python, how to format the JSON output. What we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at data which is stored. It's where we get the data for our API from. Normally you'd play around with other people's APIs, other people's databases, but for this we're going to concentrate basically on our own database. This also has ramifications for the theory section of the course too. There is a fair amount of content on databases, in particular with SQL and data definition languages and data manipulation languages, and we can look at this as the start of all of that process. So first of all, let's find the database. Many ways of starting it. We can actually start it from the command line if we want to play with that. Sometimes you may need to do that, particularly if we get errors. I'll go through that when and if we require it. First of all, I'm just going to type localhost, and if I do that I get back to the main page. If I type localhost I would get back to the main page of our web server, the XAMPP. And on there's a little button for phpmyadmin. You could just type that into the address bar yourself. For me, I'm just going to click this now to start it up. Now, depending on when you installed it or how you've played with it, you may have set passwords, you may have set different things on phpmyadmin. So some things might not work straight out of the box. This is straight out of the box, and so it should replicate what you've got unless you've changed things. However, if you do run into one or two problems, particularly with usernames and passwords, then perhaps you need to look it up or email me to find out what you need to do to resolve the issue. So this is phpmyadmin. Let me take a very little guided tour around it. On the left hand side we have all of these items where it says new, information schema, MySQL, and so on. Each one of these is a database represented by this little cylinder symbol, which is a database symbol. So each one of these is a database. In the center we've got information about what we're looking at, about which tab we're looking at, and we've got several tabs: databases, SQL, status, user accounts, and so on. I'm going to click back on the databases one for a second. Mainly you will be using these tabs and filling in boxes and just pressing a button to control your database. From time to time you will write SQL statements in here, and I shall write some in here today just to show what's going on. But more often than not you'll probably do that in programming. So let's move on. Let's create a database. I'm going to create a database called WPS. Well, you can call it whatever you want, but if I click new, what it will do is actually give me this database screen. So there's two ways of getting to it. I can either press new for a database or click on the databases, and there we go. There is a lot of information here that might be a little bit confusing at the moment. We're just going to make it as simple as possible. So to create a database, I'm just going to call it WPS. That's it. And then click create. When we create a database, it's empty. There we go. We can now see it on the left hand side. And we will be asked to create tables. Again, through the theory part of the course, you'll understand a little bit more about tables, how to join them, how to link them, how to perform some sort of integrity checks on them. For now, we're not really interested. We're just going to create a very simple table, just containing enough information for us to continue. So let's go through it. Let's create a table called person, where we store the details of a person. Notice I've capitalized the first letter of the word. That is just a convention. You don't need to, but it might help when you're reading other things or any design to actually capitalize it so that you know what you're looking at, whether it's a table, whether it's a field, whether it's a database. If we capitalize it, it means it's a table. I'm going to have 4 columns, and I'm going to click go. So that was pretty straightforward. What it's asking me to do here is to actually set up some fields, rather like headers in a spreadsheet column. We are going to give these fields some names. One of the most important fields is the first one, which is ID. Now this should be unique. Every record in the database should be unique. If we don't use an ID, we've got to specify a field that would be unique, like first name. So for first name, if I put in John, then my database can only ever have one John because it needs to be unique. So that's probably not a good one to choose. And if we're stuck for one, just use ID. It's going to be a number, an integer, and we're not going to bother with the length, but we are going to change 1 or 2 values associated with it. In other words, we're going to tell it that it is the primary key, okay, which is unique. So I've set primary key, it's just asking me 1 or 2 items about what I want to do with the primary key. Not really interested, just click go. And also I want, every time I put a record in, I'm not going to say, oh, number 1 is such and such, number 2 is such and such. I want the computer to work that out. So the next time I put a person in, it's going to say, oh, you're the 3rd record, so I'll give you the number 3. And to do that, we use something called auto increment, and all we need to do is put a tick in that box for auto increment. There are several other fields which we are not interested in either now or possibly in the future. So up to where I've got auto increment, roughly, that's all you're ever going to play with. The rest of it's a little bit too advanced. The next thing I'm going to use is the first name, because we've been using first name. Now, by default, again, I tend to use lowercase letters, maybe camel case first name. It's up to you how you do it. For me, I'm just going to use all lowercase for the field names. Now, first name is going to be text. It's going to consist of letters and numbers, and there's a specific type in the database which we use, and it is not text. It is actually a variable character. So we can store text in here up to 65,535 characters long. So if we don't need that many to store our data, we should actually reduce it. So first name, probably we only use 15 characters to represent a first name, and I get the chance to set it in the next box along the length there. So I'm going to say I'm going to have 15 characters rather than 65,535, which is a little bit of overkill. And that's it. No more. I don't need to specify anything else. I'm going to do the same with last name. I'm going to have a field called last name. That is going to be, again, a variable character. And in that, I'm just going to make it a little bit longer, 20, so I can have a longer last name than first name. The final field that I'm going to use, that we've used in our programming so far, is one called age. And that is going to be an integer, and I'm not going to set any other items on it. That's it. I've set up my table. All I need to do is click save, and hopefully those values will be saved. There we go. So now I have a table, and there it's showing me all my fields. It's showing me that the ID is the primary key. It's got a little gold key next to it. I can make adjustments in here. I can change the information. I can completely get rid of it by dropping it. I can set it to primary. Sometimes we need more than one as primary. For what we're doing, that's fine. We're finished. The only thing we really need to do is add some data into it and change exactly who can use it. So let's first of all add some data into the database. Normally you do this through some SQL insert statements, but if you're in phpmyadmin, then there is a handy little item called insert, which allows you to specify some values. So here we go. So I've clicked on insert. It's asking me what I want to do. So the first one is the ID. I'm not going to put a value into ID at all. Remember, the computer is going to generate that. Here's the first name. So in the first name, I'm going to type Joe, and then blogs, and I'm going to give Joe an age. Let's say he's 20. See if I can get some interesting items down here. So later on we can pick and choose, like give me all the people who are age 20 or above. The second one I'm going to do another first name. Let's do Jane Smith. And let's make Jane Smith a little bit older. Let's make her 30. Okay. And so that's it at the moment. I've got 2. I actually want 4. So what I'm going to do is just choose go. Now I can use these boxes down the bottom to tell me what happens after I press go. I don't want to go back to the previous page. What I want to do is insert a new row and then just click go, and it will come up with some blank boxes for me to add some more data. Notice at the top it's given me all the SQL that I need. So if I was using PHP or Python or anything else like that to talk to my database, this would be a really, really useful piece of code. It's also going to be useful for your course in understanding how to insert information into your database using the SQL language. So let's go on to the third one. The third one I'm going to have, let's see, Arthur Negus. I'm going to make him 30, so I've got 2 people who are 30 in there. I'm going to have another one with the first name that I've already got in, so Joe. This time I'm going to have him with somebody I've got a surname to share with, so he's got the same surname as Jane. I'm going to make him a little bit older, 40, so I've got a set of age ranges. This time I'm finished entering my data now, so I just need to go back to the previous page, and I'm going to click go, and there we go. We've got some more SQL inserting these items into my table. I can take a look at those. So I can just click browse at the top, and it will show me all the data that is in my table. Joe Bloggs 20, Jane Smith 30, Arthur Negus 30, Joe Smith 30. There we go. Or I could actually use some SQL. Now it's already showing me the SQL. Select star. Star means all fields. So it's saying show all fields, ID, first name, last name and age from the table person. So that's what that SQL statement means. Let's say I only wanted to find out what the first name and the age was. I could actually write some SQL to do that. So I'm going to click on SQL, and instead of this one I'm going to type select, which is the SQL statement for go find the information in the database. Select first name, comma, last name. So I only want those 2 columns, but I've got to tell it from which table I need to take it from. There may be lots of tables. We're only going to use one, so it's always going to be from person. But in other databases, you may be joining them together. So when I click go, it will run that. And hopefully, there we go. All we get back is first name. Did I say last name? Yeah, I certainly did. I meant age. First name and last name of all the people who are in my database. I could also have what we call a where clause. Now, what that means is going to filter them. If you remember, if I just choose this one, select everything from person, let me just delete that, I get all the values from the people who are in the table. But maybe I only want to find out those who are older than 20. Okay, and I can use a where clause to specify that. So if I go back to my SQL, which is almost set up for me, select all the fields. Well, let's change that. Let's just have first name and last name. First name and last name from the table person where their age is greater than, let's say, 25, and we know that's going to drop one off. And when I click go, there we go. I get just 3. So the first one is Joe Bloggs, who's missing because he was 20. So that's that one working. What I would really like to do is to be able to talk to my database from my code, and to be able to do that I've got to secure it with a username and password. One of the bad things about this is that there is what we call a root user. That's the overall administrator. That person gets to see everything, and if we were doing a production database, we wouldn't want anybody to know that username or password. So what we tend to do is we create users which can be, you can have their access and their rights and their privileges restricted to whatever you want. So I'm going to create a user now on my table person. So if I click person, the table, let's see, more privileges, there we go. Sometimes you'll see that depending on how wide your browser is. And here I've got all the privileges. Root, which hasn't got a password at the moment. I suggest if you have a production version that you have a very strong password so that nobody can get to this. This is the overall administrator and you need to remember it, otherwise you won't be able to do things with your database. But I'm going to create a new user account. Very, very simple user account which I'm going to use in my programming. Now this is where you may run into problems. If you do, we might have to go in through the command line and set it depending on what you've done previously with the database. So I'm going to click add user account. I'm going to create a very simple user. I'm going to call it WPS to match the actual database name. Just make it simple in my code. Yours will probably be a lot stronger. Where it says host name, if you left it as a percentage sign, although it will work, you might have some logging on issues. What I suggest you do is you change this to local and use localhost for the host name. I think that will solve most of your problems if you have problems. And then we're going to have a password, and the password is going to be just as simple. It's going to be WPS. Notice that all you get to see is the circles, and obviously you have to retype it. So now I have created a user on this table, so I can restrict that person just in the database, just to that simple table or the database. Okay. What I'm going to do is now select what the person can do. Now the top box here is just a quick version. Grant all the privileges on the database, WPS. That just applies to the table person. Below it is what we call global privileges, which will enable you to change anything here as well. I'm going to leave all of those unset, okay? Because I don't want this user to be able to get to somebody else's database. That would be pretty disastrous. But that's down to you. So I'm not going to have any global privileges set, but I am going to have it just on the database WPS. So once I've set my user, you could generate a password just to make it secure. I'm not going to. Once you've done all that, just press go, and we've now got a user. I'm not going to save that. Now this statement here, this is a data definition statement. It is SQL. If you cannot, for some unknown reason, access your database using the username and password, you may have to go in, as I've said, through a command line, and you will have to type pretty much most of this in to actually set up a username. So if you need to at some point, just copy and paste this, and then you can use that to refer to when you need to set up a username from the command line. So that's it. I've created a table, I've created a database, I've created a user, I've populated the table, I've set up user privileges. I'm really ready to start programming and talking to my database from anywhere, such as Android devices or from web pages or from Python. I now have what I need.